Hey, good day, Francisco. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. How are things in South Africa?
Yeah, things in South Africa are going along. We've got some interesting challenges happening in our space. And how's things in Mexico?
Well, Mexico is Mexico, but it's the winter now, it's good weather, and I'm doing fine. So, looking forward to talk with our guest today about RISE with SAP and the future that is coming there.
Absolutely. What exciting topic. Like you said, well, you may be having cold weather in Mexico. It's hot here in South Africa, and I'm sure things are really heating up for SAP customers in the space with regards to Rise with SAP and the challenges that they're going to have in this coming year around making sure they really get the total cost of ownership right. And just to welcome everybody to this event, my name is Rogan Morrison. I'm one of the sales directors at VOQUZ Labs here in the Africa region. And as you can see with me, Francisco Hansen, who's sitting out of Mexico. So great,
Yeah,
and we can kick this webinar off.
yes, welcome everyone too from my side. I'm responsible for the America business at VOQUZ Labs, and we are looking forward to talk about the options that you have in the future with SAP. How can you contract SAP in the future? What are the decision drivers and things that you need to take into account when looking into the new versions of S4 HANA, perpetual, subscription, on premise, on the cloud, compared to ECC, and so on. So, Roger, please go on.
Yeah, we got this. We've really developed this fantastic tool called Advisory Queue, and together with our advisory services, which are really a unique proposition, we help you to build very methodically a set of business cases based on various different scenarios, as for ECC, for S4HANA, and if you have a RISE proposal from SAP. So really to give you all the relevant right information, and it's really important that you actually make the right decisions based on the information that you're dealing with. So let's kick this off and jump into what we see as some of the main challenges that customers are facing in this year ahead and the next, up to 2027, when they have to really make a decision to move towards S4 HANA. So let's move on to the next slide here and just give you a bit of overview from a strategic perspective. And I think what's important to note is there's never one option. What do you think about this, Francisco?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, 3 years, 4 years ago, I don't know, time goes by so quickly. We were looking into S4 HANA, and all clients were looking into what does it mean to migrate to S4 HANA. So most clients on ECC looking into S4 HANA, new version of the software. Then some clients used HEC, HANA Enterprise Cloud, so the hosting and application management services from SAP. But now, since 2 years, we have RISE with SAP on the table. And suddenly, after doing the first 2, 3 projects, we noticed, well, this is more complicated than what we thought in the beginning. This is not a question of migrating software anymore, but it is a question of understanding the differences in managing your IT environments, your infrastructure, your cloud, yourself, but also application management services, also migration costs, return on investment, so what is justifying the migration to S4HANA. And it is not a software decision anymore. It is more a combined decision that has an effect on your level of captivity from SAP, on your ability to manage your infrastructure yourself and your service levels and adapt it to this to the changes as they come, or being on a more comfortable place but with less flexibility when you want an all-in-one contract, and say, well, I don't want to care about my infrastructure, not about application management services. Let please SAP take care of that. And then Gartner came up with their idea about the composable ERP, which is mainly saying, well, we stick with a main software for ERP like SAP, but when it comes to specific business functions, say warehouse management, we may look into another software like, say, Blue Beyond. When it comes to human resources, we may want to look into Oracle HCM or Workday. When it comes to CRM, maybe Salesforce. So it is more of a best of breed approach, still with SAP at the center, but with considering every single option and seeing what is best suitable for your own business.
Thanks for that explanation, Francisco. I think you've really outlined the initial challenges and the roadmap that companies have had to start looking at. And to add to this, I mean, we've got some other really enormous amounts of complexity that suddenly come into play. And these relate to really the application layers, the infrastructure layers, as you mentioned, hyperscalers, so different types of vendor agreements and partnerships that you have to take into consideration, all the service levels that you have and that you've had, in really an on-premise agreement and now in a SaaS negotiation, so software as a service. And that really has a massive impact on organizations who've never had that in place significantly for the ERP. And I think we can go through some of these areas of challenge that they have around other indirect and digital access. How much are you using? When Francisco spoke about composable ERP, does this have an impact on whether you're going to have an indirect or digital access risk? Absolutely, you have to take these into consideration. And also the long-term effect of cloud. Is there somewhere that you may at some point in time want to move back to on-premise? If you did, how would you get there? These are some of the additional complexity items that customers have to actually consider. And I don't think I want to pick on one specifically, Francisco, that you want to maybe talk about. Maybe it has to do with data hosting or hidden costs. What is your experience in some of the customer engagements that you've had?
Well, 20 years ago, when I was working for a media company, we started in our program management to always include the business units, procurement department, infrastructure department into every software application development project. And now more than ever, when you're thinking or rethinking your ERP strategy, it's very important to include all of those people. Now with the FinOps methodology coming up, this is something that is being very pushed by this methodology, and it totally makes sense. Why is that? Now, because when we are considering moving to RISE with SAP or not, we need to involve our infrastructure department. We need to talk with application management. We need to talk about return on investment, and this can only happen with the business units. So including all of these different areas, when we talk about contract terms, it is the legal department, right? So when we talk about all those things, we need to include the different departments in the process from the beginning and make sure that we are looking into all the dimensions and all the implications that this contracting has. So this is something that has come up and that wasn't that much considered in the first projects that we took care of. But now I see clients going more in this direction, specifically when it comes to return on investment. It is mostly impossible to think of an S/4HANA migration as a pure migration project with no return whatsoever for the business, no benefit. So you need to go into the business areas and discuss with them, what can we do to leverage the migration of S/4HANA with some additional business values that will finance the project and at the same way bring up some additional benefits for our company.
Absolutely. I think that's critical. And I think, understanding your risk, which is tied to complexity. I mean, in the project management arena, if you ask any project manager, enterprise architect, or solution architect, they'll always say the greater the complexity, the greater the risk. And so there's a lot of risk that customers really need to look into at this stage. Understanding the price benchmarks that SAP have put down, whether it's with a RISE with SAP contract or just a standard S/4HANA contract, or whether you're working through a hyperscaler or a third-party value-added reseller. It's really important to understand those, and whether you get those price benchmarkings right or wrong, you're going to carry a certain amount of risk if you get them wrong. And it'll be definitely in a negative way impacting you in that context. Considering the different conversion paths, that's also vital. to understand the risk levels that you're prepared to as an organization to understand. So I think these are some of the critical risk elements, and were some listed on the slide as well. We're not going to go through all of them, but these are some of the most important ones that you have to consider. And what we've got is some examples of how does this portray and how does this pull out in a real life example. So you can see some of the other areas, and we'll have a look at those in a little bit more detail. But these are some of the most critical risk elements. So customers really need to take consideration of these. They can't just bypass them without not understanding them. So let's have a look at some of the outcomes of that in terms of
So
what do we
it's
see from a real life example.
if you want to go back a second to the former slide, these are only examples really. What we are encountering here, talking about risks, are three main areas. Number one is now, since it is not software anymore, which was already complex with some clients having 200 different products from SAP, now we are talking about infrastructure and application management services. What does that mean? That even with the best effort of SAP of setting up a price model that works for everyone, it gets very difficult to fit the offering and to the prices and really have an objective pricing, a suitable pricing. So you need to get into the pricing analysis even much more than you were doing in the past when you were contracting S/4HANA Perpetual. So risk number one, pricing and the complexity of pricing. Risk number two, it is services, service quality, service description, service levels. So now you're suddenly comparing what do the services look like if I contract them from SAP or directly from Google, Amazon, Azure. What do they look like? Are there different service levels? Are they doing different things? How about SAP application management? So basis administration, looking at my batch jobs, looking at my OSS nodes, looking into communications of the SAP systems with others. Are these things included in my contract or are they not included? So I said prices, I said services, and now number three is return on investment. Of course, if you are trying to present your management a migration project about $20 million and you have nothing to show for on the benefit side, the first question is, why should we do it? I mean, you need to find arguments to support the migration to a new software platform with, of course, some new functionalities, but functionality is nice, it is just not a benefit. You need to really find those points that may justify your things. So again, it is pricing, it is services, it is return on investment. And this is what this is all about. These are some pricing services and pricing risks, but it is much more than that.
Excellent. Let's have a look at a real life example that you've also been engaged with, Francisco. And I think this really, hopefully, will help customers in the SAP environment really let the penny drop a little bit. So why don't you just take us through this example in terms of the sales assessment that SAP provides, and how did you see this working out?
Yeah, so sorry for simplifying this example to make it more understandable, but this is a real life example from a project. Now, as you may have noticed, many of those projects are started by SAP putting a RISE with SAP proposal on the table and driven very often very much by the sales department. So not necessarily the technicians who know in detail what you may need or not need and have discussed this with you. And even though there is a accompaniment by some technicians, it ends up very often in a situation which is not the one you want. So on the top, we are seeing an initial SAP proposal. SAP proposed the client to buy 200 full user equivalents, and based on his description, he was talking about 370 users. They put up this 200 full user equivalent proposal at a 30% discount. Then they thought, well, the client is starting to develop on BTP, so let's put a cloud platform enterprise agreement on top of that, and let's say we'll put some 200,000 on top of that, which is prepayment for your BTP. The client said, well, we don't know that much about SAP RISE with SAP, so we may need some support. So let's put a 20% preferred success. So premium support on top of that. And then disaster recovery, which is really high availability. It's 17% of the contract. We have that. Now, the initial mistake is this client really needed 120 full user equivalents. And just to get up to the excess level where you have three different environments, so production, quality, and development, you need at least 136 full user equivalents. So this is the first correction that we did. Then we started asking, well, what is the calculation basis for BTP and the 200,000 Cloud Platform Enterprise Agreement, and got no answer whatsoever. The only services we were talking about were around $60,000 a year. We lowered this to 100,000. Then preferred success, 20% goes automatically down. We didn't even take it out. And disaster recovery with the same. So we are ending up in this very simple, very small client in a situation where we have reduced the costs by discussing the single things to 50% of the original proposal. Now, I'm sad to say this is not that seldom of a situation. And this is just to show you how important it is to look into the details, to discuss the services, the service levels, the products included. Do you need high availability? Do you need preferred success? Do you want to really today start with BTP, or is this something you're planning next year? Because don't pay what you're not using this year until you start using it. And this is always the same, but now the repercussion is much bigger than it was in the past.
Yeah, Francisco, I mean, the numbers really show the difference there. And I think it's vital that customers understand that if you just take a simple initial SAP proposal and you don't have any expertise or analysis on that, you are at risk of losing out. And so we really encourage you, look at the difference there, look at the real life story in terms of working with VOQUZ Labs and the advisory queue solution that we have, and look at the difference. That really adds a significant return on investment for companies, and it would be foolhardy to miss out on that. So I think these numbers are absolutely critical in terms of how to manage your transition to S4 HANA better. And I think that really is the critical aspect. And Francisco hit the nail on the head though earlier, where he said, in the current client, you can gain up to 50% cost reductions, and that comes from various different elements. But how do you get there? So, and what do you need to get there? So, in other words, we've broken this down as simply as possible for customers. And really, on the left-hand side is pretty much what we need to get in terms of putting the right data pieces and content into the advisory queue solution, and adding that with our advisory to bring you the right outputs. And that's pretty much what we're going to walk through now. So maybe you want to take a little bit of a step in that direction, Francisco, and take us through some of the key elements that customers need to be aware of and what they need to bring to the marketplace to us to help us.
Yes, thank you, Rogan. So what we saw in the first projects that we did in this strategic contracting decisions was complexity, and clients having a hard time really understanding what they were contracting. Also, SAP and SAP salespeople who were used to sell software now not being really able to explain what the client was buying in detail. So what we then decided is to build up a methodology and a tool that would help the client making this process, this decision process, easier. That is Advisory Queue. This is our business case builder for SAP contracting strategies. So it is a tool that will help you gaining transparency and gaining knowledge about all those things. But not only is it a question of building the right financial scenarios, looking into the right things, but also getting market data for pricing so that you can set up a proper comparison of your RISE with SAP with, say, AWS, say Azure, say Google, and look into these different options that you have when contracting. So how much is application management or cloud management worth? How much is SAP managed services worth? What should you be paying for that? So if you now compare this to contracting this from SAP directly in an all-in-one contract, which of course has a lot of benefits too, you need to have those prices, and we are delivering this. We have been in contact with those big hyperscalers and discussing with them the options, and now we have brought out a tool that delivers the market data that you need for your decision, that delivers the methodology, and that gives you the insight into the differences in services between SAP and directly contracting with a hyperscaler or his partner. Why is it important? If you look into the roles and responsibilities file from SAP, the one that is attached to your RISE with SAP contract, we are roughly talking about 1,500 services. So no one has the time to go one by one through these services and really understand what are the differences between this and what I'm contracting from my hyperscaler. Now we have done this. We have reduced the number of services into comprehensible service groups that will give you very quickly an overview about what the differences are. So as I said before, is OSS node installation in or is it not in what you're contracting? Is it batch management, so regular jobs, incident management, resetting of passwords? What is in user management? Is it in or is it not in? So we are simplifying this with our tool. We'll show you in a second what it looks like, but it is all targeted to make your decision about your SAP contracting strategy for the future more transparent, more understandable, more comprehensible, and really knowing in what direction you could go, and so make a decision that is more objective and less sales influenced, so to say.
And that really adds on to what we have at the bottom there. And if I just build it from the bottom up in terms of this, is really avoiding a very long RFP process to obtain all the necessary data to make that accurate comparison. So I mean, really, this is the most important element, is to get through onto this as quickly as possible so that you can get out your business case and sit down with your senior executives, and together with that business case then make the right decisions. And that really is what Francisco has been elaborating here. So what do we need from a client side? What do we request from yourselves to bring to the table? So normally we ask for your bill of materials and the SAP contracts that you have, your infrastructure sizing and the actual AMS services that you're looking for. And then together with that specific set of information, we then start plugging that into the VOQUZ solution and put together the relevant methodology that really then produces that output. And I think I want to jump into some of the actual look and feel of how does this look. So I think we need to get into those specific elements. But I think importantly, before we get there, is to understand which client sizes really would benefit from this. And you don't have to be, lots of customers say to us, oh, but I'm not this really large SAP customer. You don't have to be a large SAP customer. If you're a small customer, it's also important that you follow the process. So you need to determine and visualize your target architecture. It's very important from an architectural perspective. Most enterprise architecture principles rely on you visualizing that target architecture from where you're coming from. And that means a change, as we said, in your infrastructure. We need to also look at all the relevant data pieces, as we've said, that bring relevant information to bear on the business case. The application management support, the SLAs, the CPEA, etc. And then we need to document your decision process. And that's really the methodology that we follow. So it's a very rigorous methodology. It's well proven in the market space. And I think it's important that you're not suddenly saying, oh, it's because I'm a very small customer, or maybe because I think I'm too large a customer that I can't fit into this methodology. That's not the case. We target all different customer sizes right across the base. So let's just have a look directly now at what does this tool do and how does it really assist you in getting the best output in terms of your business cases. And maybe we can just start it on the left-hand side there, Francisco. I think it's a really important slide for customers to understand, in terms of from a tooling perspective, what does this really mean for them, and how does this fit together? So tell us about it.
Well, when you're looking into your ERP strategy, the first task is whatever options you consider, you need to equalize them. So you need to look into what are the differences. If I have a proposal for RISE with SAP, if I have my ECC system today, if I'm considering the perpetual license option, I need to make sure that they include the same service levels, that they include the same services roughly, a similar environment, similar quality. So don't start comparing pears and apples. That's an important part of the process. So eventually the proposal that you have on the table is just incomplete. It doesn't include high availability, although you have it, or it doesn't include a sandbox environment, although you have been working in your development environment with a sandbox environment for the last 20 years, and you want to have that and stick with that. So the one part is aligning the scenarios. Then it is aligning the proposals and aligning the contents. So we call them business case components. Then we need to align the services and see, well, the comparison of services, what does it look like? Where are we including things? Where are we missing things? You will very quickly come to the conclusion, if you look deeply into the roles and responsibilities file, that there are quite a lot of things that you're doing today in SAP Basis Administration that are not provided by SAP in their standard offering. So either you need to contract this as additional services, or subcontract this with an SAP system integrator or application management services provider, or do it yourself. But you need to be aware of that, and you need to look into those details. So, and this is where the tool helps you. We have pre-assessed the level of services that SAP is offering within RISE to compare it with what the hyperscalers do. And we have the whole structure of the business case components for ECC, for RISE with SAP, for S/4HANA Perpetual, and can help you very quickly setting up those scenarios in the software to visualize them later on. So let's move on to the next things. You can include here your migration costs. You can include here return on investment, and make sure that we are covering all the areas and all the aspects, so that in the end, when we are starting to analyze TCO, ROI, OPEX, CAPEX, that we are really taking everything into consideration. So here, for example, we are looking at one part of the scenarios, so one single scenario. This is RISE with SAP, and it includes basically the software as a service offering from SAP, but we have included some add-ons. So in this case, for example, the sales department of SAP had not considered long-term backup as a part of this, and the client needs more backup than what is included in the standard offering, and they eventually needed some digital access and some things that were not included. So we completed the proposal with what was missing for the client, but then also application management services that the client wanted to stick with his actual provider and make sure that they are still getting the same level of service. So to complete the RISE offering, they're adding some user management services, batch management services, authorization management, etc. You can see here the single products that are included in this scenario. The overall spend per year, $974,000. How does the cost segregate there? Like you see, the services part is 200K, infrastructure is 380K, and software as a service is 700K. And this is what it is all about. It is about comparing things. It is about looking into things. I have been assessing clients that had in their initial offering 3 environments, but they really work with 6 environments, like including pre-production, sandbox, and training systems to the standard set of systems. And very soon the price goes up. it is not essential, but you want to compare this maybe and really decide, is this worth it? Do I really want to have all of these additional systems? Or on the opposite, do I rather want to stick with the standard configuration of 3 systems? And this is what this is all about. It is about understanding the options, understanding the implications of every option, understanding the costs attached to every option. And this is something that the tool and our assessment will help you with. And as Rogan said, well, we have been assessing clients with 200 users, clients with 20,000 users, and clients with 1 million users. So the methodology is exactly the same. The level of complexity, of course, is much bigger with the size of a bigger client, where you suddenly have 300 products with SAP and 100 historical contracts and more things to look into, especially if you're only looking into an S/4HANA contract conversion, product conversion, then you need to assess the value of your things, and then you suddenly get into totally different situations of complexity, but the methodology is still the same. And we have, as always at VOQUZ, adapted the pricing so that it fits for the small client as for the bigger client, but definitely worth looking into that.
And I think you've nailed it on the head there, Francisco. I mean, what we saw in those last 2 slides was really the comparisons between, for example, an S/4HANA on RISE with a RISE contract versus something that's on a perpetual license, and that really helps organizations to really compare apples with apples, where in the past they're comparing things that are not really relevant or misaligned, and that makes it very difficult to make that an accurate comparison. As you've mentioned, other things that fit into the advisory queue solution are things like the service catalogs and the difference between those service catalogs. There is so many data points that customers potentially miss. And that's why it's really important to understand that we bring that additional advisory knowledge and competency and capability to bear on the relevant business case. Now, there's something I just forgot to mention. I'm sure that many of you may have questions. And I'm sure you want to put those in the chat for us for later. Please do so. We're going to answer all your questions later on. I think it's important to get through the presentation content first, and then we can answer the questions. So please put them in the chat box. We're going to spend some time at the end of the presentation, which is really, we're going to be wrapping up shortly, and then we can answer those questions. And I think we just wanted to run through a few more of the slides just around the advisory queue solution that just gives you a specific look and feel for how much content and the way in which it's been put together. And I think that's really the important elements when you determine this total cost of ownership. Because if you have the right metrics and the right data points in your total cost of ownership, when you have a discussion at an executive level, it makes it so much easier when you've done an accurate comparison. If you haven't done an accurate comparison, you make incorrect decisions, and those decisions, especially in the SaaS negotiation space, are not easily undone because of the fact that you may sign a subscription contract for 3 to 5 years. And so you can't go back and change things easily. It's not just a simply reversible process, and you also lose certain amount of leverage that you used to have in a perpetual negotiations standpoint, where every year you used to look at your maintenance figures and determine with SAP whether you still had shelfware or didn't have shelfware. Now at the moment, if you go into a SaaS type contract negotiation, you have to realize that those negotiation levers have been lost, and you need to therefore cater for them in the decision-making process, and that's vital. So it's really important, as you said, look at all the relevant data elements, look at all the relevant data points, and make the best decision out of that process. So these just are the slides wrapping it up, and I think you can all agree. I mean, the most important things is at the top there. You know, start your journey, but your objective should really be to obtain the best SAP contract. In the context of S/4HANA, you have really one shot in a decade to make this contract the best that you can get it. And maybe, Francisco, you can just, I mean, I think we can wrap it up in terms of saying, what do we provide for customers at a very high level? And we've been doing this right the way through based on a proven methodology. We've automated the approach. I mean, that is unique. Customers are looking for automation in their own business processes. They're looking for a way in which it simplifies the complexity, takes away risk, and they only need a few sets of data inputs to make that happen. And then really you get the completeness of vision that you can make the accurate decisions on. So Francisco, any last thoughts and comments you want to add to this before we wrap it up?
Yeah, well, basically, the idea is don't reinvent the wheel. We've done it already. We have the methodology, we have the tools, we can show you how quickly you can put your numbers together. We have the catalog of services to be compared. We have the market pricing that you need to not set up 3 different RFPs to compare pricing. So use this. It simplifies your decision process very much. You will very quickly see how much information you get, how quick it is to come to a decision, and how much easier it is with this organized approach to get, as Rogan said, to the best SAP contract possible. This is what this is all about. It is about understanding the implications, understanding the options, and so having the fundament to make the best possible decision and the best possible strategy for the future. Because as you know, this is now the time to decide and to agree and to negotiate the future conditions of your SAP contract are now when migrating to S/4HANA, RISE with SAP, or not doing anything at all. But it is now the moment, and the impact of this is potentially for the next 10, 20 years. So use this. Make use of the situation and use this for the best.
Yeah, thank you, Francisco. I think it's been a fantastic session that we've had. And please stay tuned for our other live events. If you need to get in touch with us, we do have our details on the screen there, or look us up on the web. We certainly are available, and we look forward to having and taking your questions now. So thank you very much, Francisco, and look forward to our next session together.
Thank you, Rogan.
Right, thank you for all of those who attended, and I trust that you can hear me well there. I'm sure there are some questions that people do want to follow through on, and we'll take a look at those now and just check if I can bring those up. So let me just expand on that first. Yes, thank you. There are quite a few questions here. Let me just grab that pane out. Yep, we'll certainly send the recordings out for people. So yes, definitely some questions from other people in terms of the SAP ISVs getting through to customers in terms of hyperscalers and cloud routes. There are alternatives. Yes, we can share those with you. Does the assessment cover the target systems interoperability analysis in terms of SAP's connected systems? We certainly do have a look at the infrastructure and the content of that infrastructure and how the systems are connected together. Really important in terms of that. And I think it's important that you note that those are there. Yes, we do have some examples. I know that people are asking for examples of and references regarding the target savings that other companies have achieved. So certainly we can share some of those with you individually. And it's also important to understand the size of organization that you're talking about. It doesn't make sense to share some very large organizations with you if you're a medium size, or some if you're a small size organizations. We want to try and balance that out to get to the right sizing of that. So that's important. Again, some questions coming through here. Yes, we do get involved in the actual negotiations with SAP, and that's an optional thing for various different customers. Some customers prefer to have negotiation aspects with us, and we do 2 different negotiation, let's call it approaches in this context. The first, yeah, let me just share my webcam so we can talk about this. Let me put my webcam on here quickly. Let's see, hopefully you can see my webcam. Okay, so in terms of the different approaches I was talking about with relation to negotiations, some customers want us in the front end of the negotiations and to be negotiating directly with SAP, and some prefer us to be in the back end, in other words, more of a silent partner negotiating with SAP. So we do either or, and it's really up to yourselves from an organizational perspective which you prefer and how you'd like us to negotiate that. But we do a lot of negotiations on behalf of customers to get the best outcomes in terms of maximizing the contracts. Does the engagement cover so does the engagement cover the business case to float the RFP? It doesn't really, in terms of if you wanted to create an RFP to go out for tender process or for proposal process, this would help you set that up if you wanted to get multiple different vendors involved in terms of across all of the different service orientations. Remember that you're on one ERP vendor in terms of software, but certainly in terms of the other services, we could do that. And the duration for this assessment varies. It depends on the size, the number of contracts you have, the number of systems you have. But on average, roughly, I can say, for smaller organizations, between 1 and 3 months, and let's call it small to medium size, and then for larger organizations, between 3 and 6 months. It all depends on the complexity and the current architecture that you're on and the target architecture that you want to go to. In terms of the cost models for the use of the VOQUZ solutions, I think best to reach out to us and we can provide you with some different indications there. We do have it on a t-shirt size pricing, so small, medium, large, extra large, etc. So depending on the size of the organization and the connectivity or complexity of it. No, you do need to contract with us unless you, from a partnership perspective, want to partner with us. So reach out to us, please, on the email addresses, and we can get in touch with you from that perspective. Can we use VOQUZ for multiple EO solutions? You could, but in this case, it's specifically designed for SAP. The input data is specifically focused on SAP, and VOQUZ Labs as an organization specifically focuses on the SAP ERP environment. So let's have a look at it from that perspective. If there are other questions in terms of the other ERP vendors, let's have a look at those. In terms of enhancements, modifications, Z tables, etc., it doesn't really have the capability to do that. There are other tools out there that go in, and we work with other partners that help to do those assessments. So one of the things that we found is that we don't fit necessarily every single small characteristic in terms of understanding, but detailing the migration path in terms of Z transactions and all of the ABAP coding that you need to move across. But we work with partners who do. So that's one of the really important parts, is that we bring and consolidate all the relevant information together to give you a much more holistic picture at the end of the day. The cost of the assessment, there are defined packages. Please reach out to us and we can sit down with you and look at which is the specific package that meets your size. And that's really important to understand, and the length of time it will take, etc. As you said earlier in the presentation, what's important to understand is what you need to bring to the table in terms of the bill of materials, contracting information, etc. And then we can certainly start processing it in that perspective. Please, feel free to ask some more questions. We certainly have a good attendance today, so I would like to maybe ask and just put out a little poll there to all the attendees as well. I think it's important also to get a feel for where people are from an organizational perspective. So let's just launch a little poll here as well while we're in the presentation mode. It also helps us to get an understanding of where people are. So let me launch a little poll here. These are just yes and no questions. So hopefully you can see the poll there. Have you received a RISE with SAP offer? So we're going to leave this for a little while and just see how many customers have received this. Quite a number have. Got some background noise in the background there as well. Just maybe one of my colleagues. We also have a question while the poll is running. Average time to do an assessment subject to data being available, I would say between 1 and 3 months. It depends on, as I say, the complexity. What are you going towards from a target architecture perspective, and how quickly can we get this information through the tool system? We do have a set of templates, so we make it as easy and simple as possible. And again, depending on sizes, very important. So the poll is pretty much closed. I'm going to close the poll. Interesting responses. So if we look at the audience here, I'll share that with you. 36% say yes, 64% say no. So there is a great degree of customers receiving, and that's what we see in the marketplace, is a lot of customers receiving RISE proposals from SAP. And it's interesting to see how that will pan out in the next, especially for this year, in the next few months. Let's ask another question out there. For those of you working with your SAP systems, do you have a precise estimation of the number of FUEs you will need on RISE? So a little bit more technical questions. I think while we do these technical questions, I think it's important to understand one set of complexity about RISE migrations and SAP and migrations to S/4HANA, is that there's a lot of technical elements and there's procurement elements. And sometimes the technical elements and the technical data sets and the information that's gathered by technical people isn't necessarily shared in a easy to digest or easy to consume language for the procurement people. And therefore a lot of things get missed in that translation, let's call it that translation of information. And this is where we help to bridge that gap between the highly technical information that you need to obtain in order to get the right data sets out, and then to bring it together with the procurement side. And that's really important. Yes, all recordings are shared on our platforms and on YouTube, etc. So let me close the poll now. Lots of people answered the poll. So let's just close that, and I'll share that with you as well. So 38% say yes, 63% say no. So for those of you who don't have a comprehensive understanding of how to determine the number of FUEs you have or need or require, I think it's also important that the full user equivalence that you are working with in terms of employees, and that you optimize that first and then determine, as we said in the presentation, to get that correct. Good. Another question coming through. So do we help customers with niche functionalities like variant configuration, digital manufacturing cloud? Absolutely. We have lots of organizations that have unique sets of functionalities that they've implemented across their SAP landscape. And what we need to look at is those in terms of that uniqueness that they have, and in determining whether that will fit into the S/4HANA model. First of all, whether there's a set of functionality. We don't necessarily do that specifically, but we help and organize partners that help you with that, and in terms of the migration of those functionality, but also specifically the license consideration for those unique, let's call it modules within the SAP space. Another question coming in: during such an assessment, do we need to engage with business to capture any expected new business process flows? Absolutely, and that's a very important element. The target architecture that you build has a direct ramification on the licensing constructs that you need to put in place, and that's really important to understand. And the reason I say this is because of things like digital access. If you decide to change the application layer to include other third-party systems and move off some, let's use an example here. If you were on SAP Enterprise Warehouse Management and you're in the manufacturing and logistics business, and you move from EWM and you move on to something like Manhattan or one of the other warehousing solutions, then most certainly that may have a license impact ramification, and we should be aware of that. And you may want to do a document count on the number of sales orders or procurement orders if you're moving from something like CRM to Coupa, etc. These are things that we need to consider. So target architecture is very important, and we described that in the beginning, whether you want to go into a composable ERP, how much of your SAP landscape will you be bringing across, etc. So these are very key considerations. Let's just hide that. So I'll share it again. Just close this out. And one last poll, I think, and maybe we can ask it to the audience as well. as we have about 10 minutes to go. So have you ever compared the TCO of a RISE against S/4HANA Perpetual? So let's put that out there and see what the vote says. Let's see how many people have actually done this process before. Good to get an understanding from an audience perspective, and it helps us get an indication of where companies and individuals are at within their organizations to what they've done so far. So let's give it another 10, 15 seconds there. And then we'll close out the poll. So for many organizations, let's close out the poll. Thank you for those. We've got pretty much 40% there, and we'll just take it as that. 32% say yes. Okay, I trust in this case that your TCO was very comprehensive. For those in the 68% who said no, if you're looking for, as you said, if you're looking for the correct modeling solution and with the right advisory tool set, please have a chat to us, send us your details, and we'll be in touch with you to get this in place. I think that's really important in terms of the overall context of delivering an accurate TCO model. So are there any other questions? We've got a bit more time here left over in today's session. So if there are any other questions, please drop them into the questions and answers section, and we can help answer those as accurately as possible. I'll give you about a minute to do that. And if there aren't any other further questions, then let's close out today's session. And just check I've run through all the questions. Yep, most certainly we will be sharing some content. Please, again, reach out to us if you want more detail in terms of presentation content. Reach out to myself, please, on the labs at VOQUZLabs.com email address. Ask me for some information around the PPT or the presentation, or if you want a separate session from a company perspective, or if you're from a partner perspective and you want to work in a specific organization, please let me know. Welcome to have a detailed session with a specific set of clients. And yeah, let me say thank you very much for your attendance today. Thank you for the session and for taking the time out of your days to attend with us. We trust this was really informative and have got good feedback that has been. So we look forward to hearing from you. And as I said, any more information or questions that you need, please reach out to us. Fantastic.